As someone who enjoys the Eldar, it's no infrequent thing to hear the criticism of them being arrogant levied against them. In all fairness, this is hardly inaccurate. As a classic example of elves, space elves, but elves nonetheless, the Eldar of course are arrogant about their place. But usually left out of that accusation is the fact that everyone in 40k is arrogant. Literally everyone in 40k reeks of being so full of themselves it's at risk of forming a chaos god of arrogance and pride, which I assume would just take the form of Vegeta constantly doing the thumb pose. The Imperium and damn near every character in it are arrogant, the Tau are arrogant. I think the only faction not arrogant is the Tyranids, and that's because anything but anger and of course hunger are beyond the hive mind. So let me instead ask you this question. Who in the setting of 40k actually has the right to their arrogance? Or to put it another way, which of these factions can you look at, from their history to their present day, and say that yes, I understand why you think you're the best of everyone ever? Because some factions in this game, yeah, I can understand having the ego they do. Other factions are so full of themselves that even with their admittedly many accomplishments, them considering themselves the peak of reality is so far out of touch with reality they might explode from the audacity of themselves. Let's see who can safely assume they're the best, who's got a few good reasons to be full of themselves, and who really needs to finally be kicked in the teeth so they can be knocked down a peg or 100. Yes, I am gonna cope about the Eldar. But before I begin, unlike the undead, your lungs still gotta work, so if you've got a problem with smoking, may I introduce you to Fume, the sponsor of this video. Smoking and vaping is as much a habit problem as it is the nicotine. Pouches, patches, and gum still keep you reliant on the substance, while quitting cold turkey is rather unfeasible for most people. No judgment, I have the issue too. The simple hand-to-mouth motion of reaching for a vape stops being intentional after a bit, and is just a habit, something your brain just does after long enough. Thankfully, that's what Fume is for. There's no vapor, no batteries, no nicotine. It's not designed to feed your habit, it's designed to help you quit. It's nice and lightweight, and it's a nice thing to fidget with to replace the habit of reaching for an e-cig. It's definitely helped me cut down on vaping as much as I used to, I can assure you of that. And it's got some nice flavors to it, like mint and more. They aren't as strong as vape because it isn't pumping smoke into you. It's a nice, light thing that helps distract from the cravings. So if you've got a habit you want to kick, look no further. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code PancreasNoWork to get a free Fume topper with your first purchase today. The best time to kick a bad habit is today, so try Fume today so your lungs will thank you tomorrow. Now then, let's see who can walk the walk and see who can barely talk the talk. As is tradition for all things 40k, let's start with the big fat elephant in the room, hogging all the spotlight and releases. Usually I'd just lump them in with the Imperium as a whole, but there's so many of these bastards that here I think they're worth their own thing. The Adepts Astartes, the Emperor's Angels, the thing everyone who makes videos on 40k must at least acknowledge every now and again, lest they be forgotten and cast aside to the depths of YouTube irrelevance. They're cool, they're at least mildly important, and there's a whole load of them. And while not all of them are arrogant, at least by 40k standards, some of them deserve more ego than they have, believe it or not. To start kindly, a lot of Space Marine Chapter's arrogance is fairly understated. It goes unsaid. Black Templars, for instance, because here's the thing, right? The way they do their crusades and why they only the most technical and stretched definitions follow the Codex Astartes to me strikes as a sign that they absolutely think they're above it and how things are supposed to be done. Otherwise, they'd be properly following it. That isn't to say they're inherently wrong with how they wage war, it clearly works out for them well enough, but they've got a bit of an attitude about them, a clear sign they think they're right and others are wrong. Actually, a lot of this will be overall stuff, so I think it's also a good idea to separate the Space Marines into three general attitudes. We've got the few that are nice and humble, and dedicated protectors of humanity. Salamanders, Lamenters, the kinds of Marines that don't see themselves as above the common man, not in any insane arrogance way at any rate. They defend the people of the Imperium to an almost absurd degree with how much harm they receive for the trouble. Hardly knocking them for it. In the universe of 40k, a good deed should be celebrated, but for them, being arrogant is a vibe I don't really get. Then you have the second category, which is fairly broad. The middling kind of, not quite arrogance, but certainly viewing themselves as higher in value. At best for these folks, which I count the Ultramarines amongst this number, is a sort of Spider-Man view of their abilities. With great power comes great responsibility. They know they're above the common man, because in terms of combat efficiency, they simply are. A Space Marine is worth 100 normal people in a fight, no questions asked. The exact way this category looks can vary. Ultramarines, again, tend to protect normal people when they can, and they don't hold the average Imperial in utter contempt, but they do acknowledge that if they're sacrificing Space Marine lives, it better be worth it. It can admittedly come across cold, but sometimes the math points that way, as brutal as it is. 100 dead guardsmen is a hard pill to swallow, but if by preserving Ultramarine lives they can prevent 1,000 dead guardsmen later down the line, they're gonna do it. It's positive math in a way, just math that unfortunately means the sacrifice play isn't coming out without them knowing for sure it's worth it. Some factions can be more brutal with it than the Ultramarines, and these are broad categories, I'll remind you. Plenty of chapters along these lines can be arrogant for separate reasons. But for overall Space Marine viewpoints for how they view themselves compared to mortals, I think this works as a category. And then, of course, we have the third kind. Those who view themselves as the Emperor's angels and better than literally everyone else for it. These kinds of Marines don't view themselves as the protectors of humanity, they basically view themselves as what humanity should be, and the common man is lesser for not being a Space Marine. Leaving aside the fact that Space Marines are monsters of science that are bereft of humanity for all they're beyond it, these people tend to be assholes. You've read the type of it, I'm sure. The Marines Malevolent being one example, treating the common man like dirt who should be grateful they spent an artillery shell to bombard something as pathetic as that orphanage. Their arrogance over being Space Marines dictates how they interact with other chapters, the common man, the goddamn Inquisition sometimes. Some Marines, by virtue of them being Marines, just view themselves as better than anyone else, and they act it. So how arrogant overall are the Space Marines quote-unquote allowed to be? As a baseline, they've got themselves some level of arrogance that's understandable. The average person in 40k is born woefully under-equipped to fight what they fight, but from that average person is then born super soldiers capable of going toe-to-toe with everything from Tyranids to Chaos and coming out on top. I think it's fair to say that most people would be a bit full of themselves after taking down a Hive Tyrant, or even something less powerful like an Orc Knob. Space Marines do that stuff regularly, so a bit of an inflated ego is to be expected. And to get to an earlier point, some chapters that clearly view themselves as above others in some ways have earned it. The Black Templars and their Crusades have done solid work. Not necessarily morally good work, they kill plenty of people I'm willing to say absolutely don't deserve it, but their methods work for what they want, and so with that in mind, a level of pride and arrogance over what they do is to be expected and understood. I get why they stick to their way of doing things. I can hardly fault a Space Marine for considering themselves above the average person when they're going against the threats that they do. It's valid. Especially if it's just in a you aren't built for this kind of way as opposed to treating normal people like crap. Most people aren't built like Space Marines, to the point that holding that opinion arguably isn't even arrogance. It's just correct. But on a case-by-case basis, I find myself wondering where the hell some of these chapters get off calling themselves the best or being as self-assured as they are. Let's start with the Minotaurs for this. The Minotaurs of badmouth Ultramarines and their successor chapters to their face, including Marnia's Calgar, regularly beat the snot out of other Marine chapters and keep getting away with all sorts of stuff, as is fitting a chapter on the payroll of the High Lords, of course. The Minotaurs, however, and any other chapters like them, at least I'd say, do not have the right to be arrogant. They are on the payroll of functionally the highest powers in the Imperium, save Guilliman. They get the best toys, equipment, and more, always deploy at chapter strength against other chapters that are both dealing with other things and almost certainly aren't at full strength, and beat the piss out of them. If you ever see a Minotaur make a claim that they're better, ignore it as hard as you can. When they go to war, it's basically like if the entirety of the Navy SEALs or the SAS jumped Lieutenant Dan. So Marine chapters along those lines don't deserve a shred of arrogance they may or may not have. Some toe the line as well, and I'd like to take a quick moment before I go on to say that this isn't necessarily how arrogant a faction is, so much as do they deserve any arrogance they might have. With that in mind, the Dark Angels. On the one hand, they have the second largest amount of successor chapters out of all the first founding legions, only being beaten out by the Ultramarines. This inherent reliability and repeated use of their gene seed lends credence to them being allowed to have a bit of an ego. They were entrusted with Dark Age tech by the Emperor himself, up to and including actual Men of Iron, which is another thing that would absolutely be sending my ego through the stratosphere if I was them. Having God tell me that only me and my best friends have those kinds of toys would make me think I'm the coolest guy around. I get it. And their combat record is nothing to sneeze at either. Sure, they lose some fights, and the Rangdan Xenocides weren't great, but by and large they win a good deal more than they lose. But then we come to the fallen elephant in the room, and boy howdy is it the kind of shame that makes a lot of Marine chapters, not just them, look terrible. I don't think it's possible to get an accurate count of the amount of fellow Imperials the Dark Angels have gotten killed, either through direct action or negligence, in their pursuit of the Fallen over the last 10,000 years. Ignoring Lionel Johnson coming back and redeeming at least a good chunk of the Fallen, either directly or with his blanket goal of doing it, the Dark Angels, in order to erase their shame on their own, have caused themselves so much more shame. Any pride they feel in their duty should be tempered immensely by the fact that countless fellow Imperials have perished in their attempts to hide their past. And the thing is, it doesn't need to be a shame. Especially early on when people like Guilliman were still around, they probably could have just said, "Hey fellas, fellas. We had a pretty major schism back on Caliban, but it was all this one guy and our recruits back home. Gilliman probably would have said in response, yeah, no worries, fellas. Me and your dad were working through our own stuff. I know you all aren't inherently impure, and that would have been that. But they couldn't quite bring themselves to say that, or report on it in any ways, and then cue 10,000 years of team killing and more. Any pride they may have earned themselves, even if justified in a vacuum, has to coexist with all the crap they've pulled hiding their dirty little secrets. Especially because after a few thousand years, it went from hide evidence of the fallen to hide evidence of the fallen, also hide all the times we team killed keeping the fallen hidden. This extends to basically all their successor chapters too, since the Unforgiven are about the closest thing to a Legion left in 40k. And then there's just shitters like the Avenging Sons, who just suck. Chapters with success records they have no right to be proud of themselves because holy god are they getting bodied all over the place. So overall, how arrogant can Space Marines be? I'd say a 7 out of 10, but they're so varied that that's just the average if you picked out of all the chapters that exist at random. Some of them deserve every single bit of ego they might have. The Ultramarines, of course, I mean the Ultramarines. No mass hidden shame, reliable warriors that almost always get the dub, they truly are the greatest of them all. Your average Space Marine is pretty alright still, being powerful warriors unmatched by a good chunk of the galaxy and with the training and equipment to survive the things they can't just brute force through. And then you find the real stinkers at the bottom of the barrel, be it those with hidden shames, those whose records are a lot less stellar than they should be, or those that are Space Marine supremacists and think that they're anything beyond weapons stripped of humanity as much as possible. Or the Iron Hands. Imagine being so fundamentally wrong about what your dad wanted for you. Iron Hands truly are one of the chapters of all time, and I hope they're upset over what they are as often as possible. Which, I suppose, before they rip off as much meat as possible, they are upset about their existence, so I guess all is well. Now I'll just combine everyone else into one cumulative whole for the sake of expediency, but I'll still go everyone on their own, of course. How much of an ego does the Imperium have a right to have on average, discounting the Space Marines? I think for a slightly different start to normal, I'd like to look at the Sisters of Battle. And I'm gonna be real with you, I think they've got a right to a solid 9 out of 10 level of arrogance, with a good argument to be made for 10 out of 10. Here's why. The Sisters of Battle, both in-universe and by us people in the real world, are oftentimes considered to be a solid middle ground between normal people and Space Marines, if not near outright equals to the Marines with what they can do. They've got power armor and bolters, training the likes of which few mortals could survive, and quite frankly, not too many potential sisters do survive, all things considered. From that, they come out on top to become the strongest warriors you can get from humanity that don't require genetic manipulation, like the Space Marines or Custodes. If you remember the, I believe it was 9th edition trailer with the Sisters and Marines versus Necrons, that's a big part of why they deserve an ego. When you're charging side by side with a Space Marine, there's an implication that the Space Marine, something you consider to be an angel, himself considers you to be at least capable of keeping pace, which does wonders for one's view of themselves, I'm sure. But their faith is quite frankly why I think they deserve all the ego they might have. They work literal miracles so frequently it's a tabletop mechanic. A lot of the time this is discussed in the sense of what it lets them do, mechanically or narratively. It means you can cheat the dice as an official army rule. It lets the sisters inherently counteract the ruinous powers. Both of these are true, but look at what it means to be the sister receiving the ability to cast these miracles. From their perspective, which is a one I think is entirely right to have, a sister casting a miracle is proof that not only is their religion right and just, but that they've been chosen as a conduit for their god's wrath. Yeah, if I was them and the Emperor was giving me some magic god juice to smite a bloodthirster, I'd be over the goddamn moon on my own hype. There was an Imperial Saint who was pretty dismissive of others before Abaddon got him killed permanently, and you know what? I get it. If the Emperor implicitly said I was hot shit, I'd act like hot shit. Don't pretend you wouldn't either. Overall, yeah, they're pretty earned of their arrogance, even if I think the fact that ultimately their god would probably be disgusted with their existence keeps them from that 10 out of 10. Although, to counteract that argument, you could say they're so correct that they disprove their own god on how reality works, which would mean they could be the most arrogant faction in the game, and I couldn't fault them for it. What about the Imperial Guard? Do they have a right to an ego? Another yes, but a more tempered yes. They have a right to a 6 or 7 out of 10 arrogance. 6-7, 6-7, I hold all of you in contempt. But seriously, before you all jump at my throat, yes, the Imperial Guard is the standard men and women of humanity holding the line and doing what they can against the terrors of the universe, and there's a lot of terrors in this universe. They do a pretty alright job of it, all things considered, and that's to say nothing of the fact the Guard keeps producing either legendary heroes or regiments that are damn near Space Marine chapter levels of effectiveness. Cadians held the line for 10,000 years and then kept going. The Armageddon Steel Legion are the premier orc hunters of the galaxy. Katakan jungle fighters make the Raven Guard and Alpha Legion look look like fools. And then we have people like Caiaphas Cain, Yarick, Gaunt. These figures and their adventures with the Guard have catapulted them into being some of the most well-known figures out and in the universe. If you're part of the Valhallan 597th, a good chunk of the Cadian regiments, or any of the other big ones, yeah, celebrate your battles. Hell, any guardsman engagement against another faction that is a tabletop army should be a cause for celebration. Some schmucks with las guns and tanks based on tractors bodied literal demons from hell and more. I'd be full of myself. Telling a guardsman who rolled insane on his hit and wound rolls and finished off a bloodthirster he should be more humble is something you should get punched for. That fella deserves the round of drinks everyone's buying him before the Inquisition kills him for seeing chaos. But a lot of the time, the guard winning isn't necessarily through brilliant tactics. They just have 3 tanks and 500 guardsmen for every enemy they're facing, and they still take 50% casualties. A lot of the time, guard victories are achieved through simple weight of bodies, because the Imperium has lost most of its good tech, but lasguns, Leman Russes, and bodies it will never run low on. Even a lot of their brilliant strategies do this in mind heavily, with acknowledgement that the Guard isn't short on bodies and human lives will therefore be used as resources. Maybe I'm a bit woke and cringe for this one, but I can only give you so much credit when your victory is built on the corpses of a consistent 30% casualty rate. It's also worth remembering that the most frequent opponent the Imperial Guard fights isn't Xenos or Chaos or even proper uprisings by traitor guardsmen. It's rebelling planets. Not even their PDFs necessarily, just the random rioting schmucks who don't want to be part of the Imperium. Sometimes that turns out to be caused by chaos or gene stealers, but a lot of the time it's just people that don't like this whole Imperial tithe thing. And it's a lot harder to say be proud of your job when the average thing you do is tell a bunch of protesters to face the wall. Still, at least for the regiments primarily fighting proper outside threats, or those who've made figures like Colonel Strachan and whatnot, there's some pride to be found. And every now and again, we get a guy like Lord Solar Macarius leading everyone to greatness beyond what anyone short of the Emperor did. There's plenty of corruption, and I do mean plenty because some rogue traders and noble families consider serving as a guard general to be a gap year, but there's generally competent figures to be found here too. They have a right to plenty of pride, but maybe not so much outright arrogance. Other organizations start falling off a bit. The AdMech is 50-50 with things. For their greatness, we've got them keeping the Imperium afloat single-handedly with their industry, keeping the lost secrets of technology somewhat around, and being able to basically do whatever they want unless an Inquisitor is directly in front of them. They're a powerful force that, ignoring author fiat, would probably outlast the Imperium when it finally falls. They're stretched thin, as the intro to Mechanicus makes a point of mentioning, but that's hardly a thing worth holding against them on an individual level compared to the rest of the Imperium, which is stretched thinner. The downsides for them are rather extreme, however. Their tech base is rotting beneath them for all they're preserving what they can. They're about as subdivided into different tech heresy and opinions as you can be, and their religion has a supremely high chance of being technically wrong. Which is funny because they might also be right, and machine spirits may damn well be actual spirits. Some are certainly AI, and others are certainly just ritual and superstition, mistaking an Alexa for an AI or a ghost, but other machine spirits may just be that exact thing. But before any cogheads watching this get too arrogant, lore has been leaning more and more towards the Void Dragon being the machine god, so they're outright worshipping an alien deity as their precious logic god. This does not look good for them. 5 or 6 out of 10 for arrogance is earned because they've got stuff going for them, but overall there's a lot that should be keeping the egos of any cogheads in check that tends to not do so since they're still all unbelievably full of themselves. Cole may be a damn smart guy, but I find it hard to give him too much credit when he's even more vulnerable to a toaster in the bathtub than a normal person is. Combining the rest together to really get this ball rolling, the Imperium as a whole I honestly give like a right to a 4 out of 10 score for the arrogance scale. Imagine for a moment with me the situation it's in. In a lot of ways, it does fight terrible foes. Chaos, Necrons, Tyranids, Zorks, none of those are exactly pushovers. It's held on in a hostile galaxy as the dominant superpower for 10,000 years. It's clawed its way through thick and thin, mostly thick if we're being honest, against powers from a time when Earth was still ruled by reptiles. It has held on against the odds time and time again, and even after half the galaxy was separated from the other half by a wall of hell, it keeps going. None of this is inherently wrong. I won't try and say otherwise. That said, I'm a Xenos fan, so you're gonna get the other side of the argument, as it were. The cope if you're an Imperium stan, the righteous truth for my fellow Xenos players, and I don't really know where Chaos players stand on watching the Imperium and Xenos fling shit at each other. Probably just pointing and laughing. The Imperium got its initial position being led by a literal god against a galaxy that had almost zero things in the way of meaningfully contesting it. After the Rangda were defeated, there were no major threats to the Imperium. And yes, I know the heresy happened in Chaos, but there wasn't really a grand Chaos empire equal to the massive and ever-growing imperial one. Chaos corrupted the Primarchs, not declare war with an Everchosen or anything. The Orcs were nothing much at the time, still a threat to be sure, but by and large they read like footnotes. The Eldar were still reeling, the Tau didn't exist, and the Tyranids hadn't arrived yet, with the potential exception of an event that could be interpreted as a single hive fleet being defeated by the Emperor himself. They had God and his children leading the charge against foes vastly weaker by comparison. They didn't so much claw their way to the top early on as bulldoze through the equivalent of a bunch of random bozos who all had broken arms and legs. They then immediately dropped the ball a few hundred years into their existence, which is not a good look. In terms of losing to Horus, I won't make fun of the Emperor too much because 4 gods tends to be stronger than 1, but in terms of making a stable society, he really dropped the ball as half the planets he conquered immediately dipped out to side with Horus. Half his forces, not just Space Marine, but plenty of mortals too, jumped ship from the Imperium. Not a good look. The Imperium then proceeds to spend the next 10,000 years rotting from the inside out and the outside in. Planets constantly secede because it doesn't know how to handle a world where chaos exists as much as the Renaissance Age civilizations of Warhammer Fantasy, and because it just sucks, because most rebellions are just rebellions. It doesn't know how many planets it controls, it doesn't know how many Space Marine chapters exist. There are so many ways it fundamentally fails at being an empire that saying you're a proud Imperial tends to just sound like you're sprouting propaganda. Not proud to be a human in this universe, that's fine. But an Imperial is someone defying the odds in spite of being part of the Imperium of Man, not because of it. Just look at what the living conditions are like on hive worlds. Sometimes those are encouraged to be like that, and if you're intentionally cultivating underhivers like some Space Marine chapters do, you don't deserve to be proud as shit. Most of what it fights are themselves too, the decaying remnants of others. The Imperium blowing up a craft world is not them fighting the powerful and mighty race that ruled the galaxy, because it very easily can be seen as them blowing up a cargo hauler filled with refugees and calling it a glorious victory. The only things they fight that are in their prime are the Tyranids and the Tau. Fair enough on being proud of fighting Tyranids, those things are awful, but the Tau are a millionth their size. I'm sure I could kick the hell out of a 12-year-old, I wouldn't brag about it, not unless the 12-year-old I was fighting was like Gohan or something. Even Chaos is weaker than it was in a lot of ways, relatively speaking at least, because now they're contending with the Imperium's god, who himself has stated he's surprised there's a humanity left to Gilliman. Plus, the champions of Chaos really were just better back in the day. Abaddon's no Horus, I'll tell you that much. Speaking of, though, the Chaos Primarchs even seem lesser than they were, perhaps in part because of 10,000 years of the great game of Chaos zoning them out of the mortal world. The Imperium has things to be proud of, but as a whole, it's the superpower of the galaxy punching down in almost every way. Its enemies are lesser than they once were, its own abilities are lesser than it once was even without bringing up Dark Age humanity. It's a shadow of its former self, much like humanity as a whole is. The pride Imperials may feel is in many ways unearned, as they were led by a god against a weaker galaxy than ever before, and they've just barely managed to hold on to their title as the superpower. None of this applies to Imperial Knights, however, because someone piloting a Pacific Rim Jaeger and acting like a medieval knight is unmatched aura and deserves all of the pride. That's it. That's the end of it. They are allowed a pride amount of 100 out of 10, because if you think you wouldn't be the most arrogant dude around while piloting a knight, then I think you have far too high an opinion of yourself. As always, Chaos 2 will be lumped together, because I don't feel like discussing factions like the World Eaters longer than I must. TLDR, Chaos is like the Imperium, but slightly more allowed to be proud of itself, I'd say. Only ever so slightly, though. Credit where it's due, being the chief threat in a galaxy as filled with dangers as 40k is certainly something to brag about. And basically everyone present up to the Orcs will ally with the Imperium to take you down, you've earned yourself a bit of street cred. Entire sectors of Imperial space are damaged, if not outright destroyed, when Chaos makes moves, and their cults and less obvious schemes are ever lurking. There's nowhere you can go to avoid them, not permanently, because sooner or later every world will fall in their sights. If you care to characterize them rather than view them as an almost agencyless force of nature, the Chaos Gods themselves deserve plenty of pride too. Yeah, they're afraid of the Emperor, which is in part why I'm docking some points, but that's one guy they've ever been afraid of. Properly afraid of. Discounting Age of Sigmar and Fantasy, of course, in which case everyone from Sigmar to Nagash to Karl Franz makes them shit their pants in fear and rage. Summon the Elector counts. Apologies, that's completely unrelated, it's just been too long since I've said it in a video. Back on topic, that's a pretty good track record. Slaanesh in particular I think deserves the most pride for godly might, as is fitting her portfolio. Yeah, she's typically characterized as the weakest of the four with the most room to grow, but she also bodied the entirety of the Eldar pantheon at once. The only exceptions were Isha, who given her track record probably just stood to the side in terrified shock, which to be fair is understandable, Kegarak, who wasn't there, and Cain, who died in part thanks to her anyways. That's a hell of an opening act. As for their demons, they're demons from hell, but without that unfortunate fallen angel from God's grace shtick to make them far more pathetic than anything. They're horrifying, powerful, and anything short of at least a Space Marine or Aspect Warrior is likely to have a horrible day around them. Moving on to Chaos Marines, they're warriors that have spent 10,000 years non-stop waging rebellion against the ultimate power in the galaxy, and haven't been wiped out yet. They traverse hell itself with not quite ease, but regularity and familiarity that no one else can match short of the actual demons, and they're the most feared mortals around for most of the galaxy. Led by the successor of the man who brought the Imperium to its knees in the form of Abaddon, I won't deny that Chaos Marines are scrappy bastards who have kept on trucking in spite of all the odds, or perhaps because of them in many ways. But the cracks start to show then. Most of the early on Traitor Marines, those who come from legions, didn't want to be there in Chaos's clutches. The Death Guard, for instance, were turned largely because one asshole named Typhus trapped them in Nurgle's hands and forced Mortarian's hand. The World Eaters didn't become Khorne's chosen legion because of their valor and prowess, but because they jammed nails in their head because they wanted to be like Daddy. Most of the Chaos Marines that formed the faction are pathetic. They didn't want to be there in hell, but for one reason or another, they're stuck now. Special shout out to the Emperor's children, who went from honorable warriors striving to be the best to pride and sensation-ridden assholes who were the worst ever. They deserve negative arrogance because they suck so hard. Even other traitors from later on in the Imperium's history aren't exactly bad in 1,000. The Red Corsairs always get me. Why did you join the forces of hell? I don't like taxes, and I was told invading hell is a terrible idea. What is there to say? Legitimately, what is there to say to that? Any pride that group may get from fighting off the Imperium against the odds and everything else is immediately lost because they joined up with hell on account of being told that invading hell is a bad idea. Holy shit, dude, I think I might have to take back any Iron Hand slander I might have left. Red Corsairs have their heads so far up their ass they can taste their hair. Demons also tend to get jobbed a lot alongside their Chaos Marine allies. If it isn't the opening act of a narrative event, expect to see everything from Horrors of Tzeentch to Bloodthirsters jobbed by whoever is fighting them. Sometimes it's acceptable, such as in games like Bolt Gun. That's a boomer shooter. I don't care for lore accuracy. I care for fun, shooty good times. But any named Space Marine's capable of jobbing a demon. It stops meaning something when one kills a demon of any kind because it happens so frequently. They get jobbed by anyone who believes hard enough in something. How am I supposed to think someone can back up their talk with action when if I think hard enough about a golden vegetable, they explode? And of course, Chaos as a whole is a bunch of parasites feeding on mortals. They don't get power through earned schemes and plans, but in large part just by the galaxy existing. Khorne doesn't have to hand in a war to benefit from it. He's done nothing and is given free power for his non-existent trouble. It's worse than pathetic because there's no pity to be found here. Their existence is worthy of contempt, and the pride anyone in Chaos from a Marine to a demon of the gods themselves might feel should always be tempered by the fact their power and very being is nothing they've done anything to achieve. They won the lottery as the ultimate parasites and have used that winning ticket to be miserable tumors on the face of the galaxy. Also feel free to insert here as well all of the insults you want against every single meme moment Abaddon or whoever else have had in lore, be it failing at 12 Black Crusades or indeed Malum Kaido folding the entirety of Tzeentch, Nurgle, and the Black Legion's forces inside out. That's not even touching upon how half of what Chaos forces say are just lies to look better. Tzeentch knows all, says a greater demon of Tzeentch. No, he doesn't. He knows a lot, but he doesn't know close to everything. Chaos relies on seduction and lies because every reasonable person in a decent enough situation would look at them and go, wow, you're awful. Reasonable people don't join hell. I'd even say most unreasonable people don't join hell. And maybe it's the Catholic in me coming out, but I don't think most people have pride to take in with joining hell. Certain parts of Chaos can be slightly prouder than the Imperium, but by and large, they aren't any better and in many ways are worse. The only people I think should be proud in Chaos are the other bastards through and through. Those bastards that join Chaos because they think they're them, ready for anything, and are capable of throwing down with the toughest beings the galaxy has to offer with their hell-granted power, and then winning. They're evil, they're ruthless, they aren't to be emulated. But 40k and Warhammer in general being what it is, those few who can join up with Chaos out of selfishness and kick ass stand a hell of a lot taller than the slaves to darkness around them that delude themselves into thinking joining Chaos was a choice they had to begin with. A reasonable amount is the short of it. They have a reasonable right to arrogance. Technological progression still being a thing for them already puts them leagues ahead of others in being proud of their capabilities, because unlike everyone else, the Tau aren't living in the shadows of what they once were. They've been growing slowly but surely, taking little bits of space every now and again, with those larger expansions bringing in more sizable gains. There's some good stuff here in their history. And being able to fight everyone else when the footing is equal, or even a bit against the Tau, numerically at least, is a damn good look. Pulse carbines and railguns are to the Imperial Guard what the Imperial Guard is to people asking nicely for the tithe to be be reduced. One of the earliest books on the Tau involves someone in a battle suit casually talking to an apothecary while his suit automatically glasses at another Marine mid-conversation. That kicks ass. Them being the most willing to talk things out is also something I'd say is a point of pride, especially because they aren't stupid with it and do have factions like the Tyranids, Orcs, and Dark Eldar on the kill list. Call me a lame hippie loser, but being willing to at least try and work things out is something to hold your head up high about. It ain't flashy or glorious, but when you're one of 5 groups in the setting not resorting to murder off rip, I think that's a good reason to stand proud. That said, their situation in the galaxy really should make them consider how loudly they shout about the greater good. It's almost a pure power thing, to be honest. The most commonly known thing about the Tau is that if anyone decided to focus on them, it'd wipe them out, even if it would cripple that faction in response. Something related I believe to be true too is that if the Tau ever made themselves too annoying to someone else, they're going to make themselves that target to finally be wiped out. They walk a fine line of being annoying enough for people to take them seriously, but not so annoying that this means they just wipe them out instead of keeping them in mind as potential allies when the Tyranids or Chaos roll in. There's also plenty of dissent to be found, and depending on how reliable the reports are, the potential for them to be sterilizing some of their client races and that potential ethereal mind control business does cause some hiccups. If your unity stems from your leaders brainwashing all of you, that knocks some serious points. That said, in my opinion, it's more holding them back compared to knocking them into the negatives. I know this is going to be a pretty short section, but I promise you that isn't because I'm going full Black Templars fan on ya. The Tau have plenty to be proud of. There's potential for cracks in their ideology and methods, but there's also enough going for them that, yeah, some measure of arrogance is warranted. At least enough to be able to be consistently smug and get away with it. The kind of smug where you think, how man, that guy's such an asshole, but he's also kinda earned it. The main thing is a matter of knowing their place. You can be quietly proud and hold your head up high when dealing with people. That's fine. When those people can crush you like a bug if you push the envelope too much, maybe hold back just a bit on shouting about the greater good. I used to defend them, viewer. I tried. I like dwarfs, I like AI in fiction, I like Deep Rock Galactic, but there's nothing. There's like a book. That's not enough. That's not enough for me to remain invested. I don't like dwarfs that much. I certainly don't like dwarfs that are halfway between being dwarfs and some other less interesting thing that much. So in the name of being honest with my bias, they get to be middlingly arrogant by this setting standards. This will also be a quick segment. They've retained a good chunk of their technological prowess and ability. That is undoubtable. They're advanced enough to be able to dim their souls somehow and make themselves semi-invisible to demons, like the Tau, but on purpose. They strip entire planets bare regardless of who's defending them. They work with just about everyone, and they're powerful enough to beat down Tyranid hive fleets. And hell, again, they have functioning AI buddies that don't want to kill them. That's damn good for 40k standards, especially because as I understand things, they treat the Robokin like normal kin, just robotic. That gets a hell yeah from me, brother. All of their tech, however, is because they have these massive god cores keeping them going. The Votan themselves are what keeps the kin elevated above the rest of what humanity is degenerated into, for all that they're now dwarfs instead of humans. When those finally go, or at least become so slow in response times they're basically gone, it's game over for them. Their downfall will be so catastrophic it'll be like a miniature Age of Strife. It's not a good situation by any means. The kin aren't dumb, and I've no doubt plenty of their systems would be able to be maintained, but without the Votan themselves, I don't think they'd be nearly as effective in anything as they are presently. They're on the cusp of a major decline, and their efforts will now determine if they can keep being sanctimonious and judgmental about their tech level, or if a nice piece of humble pie is going to be slammed into their face. Being able to tear apart planets regardless of who owns them is also something to be proud of being able to do, in the sense of being able to do it. Pissing off the Imperium by devouring a dozen random planets at Earth-level technology is an act that itself isn't really something to hold in high regard. Like, good job, asshole. You tore down something 20,000 years behind your current tech level. I'm not giving you a high five for it. The Leagues overall get a middling degree of arrogance they can exhibit, with the potential for things to go either way based on how the Votan go. If they can fix or at least push off Votan degradation by a good amount of time, they can be prouder than the goddamn Necrons can be. If they biff it and the Votan degrade, they better get used to their status as abhumans being levied against them and prepare to give the Adeptus Mechanicus a whole lot of tribute, because they're going to need to kiss so much ass in the Imperium that they'll be underneath the Golden Throne doing it to the Emperor himself. This will be the shortest segment, and it's only here because I'm not giving the Tyranids one. They get no arrogance deserved. I've said it before, but there are two paths to a Genestealer cult uprising. They win and get devoured by Tyranids. They lose and get crushed by the government of whatever planet they're on. Their greatest victory is setting up a buffet where they're the dessert. You get negative arrogance. Alright, Orc fans, I'm opening with an immediate compromise here. Judging the Orc mentality is something I feel is best done with a two-part way of looking at things. If you look at an orc through the mindset of an orc, they get the pass for the highest amount of ego. There was even an Eldar who said as much once, that the orcs have won civilizations because any debates and moral quandaries we have are silly questions the orc don't even bother asking or worrying about. They live to fight in a galaxy that's all about fighting to live. That's the biggest dub you can get. So if you don't feel like being annoyed, orc fans, you can safely click away, because I do mean what I just said. But if you look at them through the standards of everyone else and what normal people consider pride-worthy, they fall hard. They live in barbaric camps where beating the snot out of each other is the most worth a damn skill, usually followed by things like brewing, which helps beat the snot out of people, or making weapons to beat the snot out of people with. They are barbarians, and not the cool Conan kind, the kind where reading at a first grade level makes you the smartest dude on the continent. Pride and strength is the kind of thing that I feel only works for characters, not entire factions. Vegeta is the proud Saiyan prince, and I go, hell yeah man, that's my goat. I'm so excited to watch you get your shit rocked and still be the coolest guy on screen. The Viltrumites are savage brutes that fold the moment someone introduced them to the concept of a hug. Their technology is something to be a little proud of. It working best for them and worse for other races is a good feature. It being able to work in spite of being cobbled together by garbage is also good, as is them being able to effectively copy almost anyone else's stuff and integrate it into their forces. It would be a lot better if it worked properly all the time and wasn't blowing up semi-frequently, and wasn't equally dangerous to the orcs as to the enemy. As you might know, they spend most of their time fighting each other. In the orc view of things, this is no problem. Who gives a better fight than the boys, after all? From the viewpoint of everyone else, we have a faction that if fully united could at least severely beat down everyone else, if not outright sweep over reality, and they don't do that because they're almost all brainlets who keep beating on each other. Being such a window licker you screw yourself out of galactic domination does not make me want to give you an ego pass. But to end positively towards a faction I like, if you're an orc, nothing I could say is possibly worth considering. They fight, they win, and if they lose they had fun and can maybe even fight later on. From the perspective of most other people, there ain't much to be proud of here. Being stronger than everyone else isn't as meaningful when they usually just beat each other up. But to an orc, this is irrelevant. Who cares who you fightin' as long as you're fightin'? Who cares if your weapon is crap, the rest of your equipment is crap, and you yourself live surrounded by crap, when at any moment things can be loud, explosive, and fun. Now this one's gonna get me in some crap, but I'm an Eldar fan, so of course I need to look down on the losers of the war in heaven when I'm in the camp of the winners. They start off alright, especially if we're going back to the Necron tier, one of the earliest races to evolve, which isn't really anything they did, but they did use that head start to invent some crazy technology. The kind of stuff that looks like magic, something to give them a standing ovation for, since they're either at or damn close to the technological ceiling of 40k. Then they got bodied by the old ones in between a near endless amount of civil warring, and I can't give them many props. El Bozo across an entire species. Yeah, the old ones were the psychic masters of the galaxy, so you might argue it was an unfair fight, but I'd argue picking a fight with God is pretty fucking stupid. I won't blame the Necrons as a whole for selling their souls though, at least. That was mostly one guy. They did decide beforehand it was wise to give the Catan metal bodies, however, which was a colossal goof to be sure. From there they did go on to kill the old ones, that deserves credit, and from there it was a pretty substantial amount of dubs to their name, even against beings like the Krork. But from there it was more losses. They looked at the galaxy around them as the dust sort of settled a little, saw the Eldar growing even higher in power, and noped the hell out. Which in itself was a wiser decision than sticking out a losing battle as opposed to giving their enemies time to fall apart on their own, but they did ultimately piss off and hide. Nothing really to be said for the next several epochs worth of galactic history, because when you nap until the year 40,000 from 65 million BC, you really don't have much to show for your time in the galaxy. And this is the crux of the issue for why I can only give them so much credit. They're some of the most fearsome fighters in the galaxy by far, erasing entire planets on a whim when they set their sights on one. They have time travel, can unravel stars even if they try not to because it might set off a chain reaction, and have enslaved their own gods that once stole their souls. Plenty to hold their heads up high over. But that whole rightful rulers of the galaxy thing always struck me as hollow bragging. Yeah man, this is all rightfully ours. You never owned the galaxy. You tried and got slapped down, then lost your souls trying for it again and it still didn't work. Even if they did, they slept for 65 million years. Brother, that is no longer yours. Your nap was on an evolutionary timescale. That is no longer your property. Half of them woke up wrong, too. Alright, not half, that's probably exaggerating, but plenty of Necron lords who went to slumber with their faculties intact woke up mad, or even simply physically messed up. Turns out a rest that long will give you crazy bed sores, and some didn't even do that. Some just didn't wake back up, and what emerged back into the 41st millennium was a broken and fractured people beyond what the Necrons already were after biotransference. Their personalities are in many ways put on by them because they know they've lost so much in the furnaces of the Catan that putting on an act is what keeps them sane. It's not entirely an act. Trazen is a klepto-archaeologist by heart, and Imhotep is the kind of arrogant that you simply can't fake. But they're a broken people because in many ways they've lost what makes them people. They can't appreciate music, art, culture, beyond mathematical values and whatnot. They feel cold pride and everything is dimmed. They themselves can no longer get to a 10 out of 10 arrogance. Not truly at any rate, and not beyond a few exceptional individuals. And I know I'm repeating myself, but I can't get over them not really ruling the galaxy. You factually did not. You had Necrons all over it, I can't dispute that, but the Necron tax policy for all that time was honk shoo me me. That isn't ruling. There wasn't even evil slaves being taken, or client states, or wacky plans. Your claims are nonsense. For something a bit more agreeable to Necron fans, hopefully, they exist in a science fantasy setting and can't use magic. If magic is involved and you can't use it at all, that is a hindrance. Even in Warhammer, where magic is actively malicious and blows up if slightly mishandled, it's still a hindrance not being able to use magic. Not having souls sucks in a metaphysical, what have we become way, but not having access to chain lightning when other people do sucks in a very obvious way. But to turn back around to being positive, the big thing I can give them is their overwhelming power and technology. I can only try and talk down to them so much without the knowledge of them being able to unmake me with that technology that basically is magic means I'm talking out of my ass at least partially. And as the opposing side of the war in heaven, I gotta give them some credit. They held off countless foes at their prime after having their souls devoured, killed their arch-enemies the old ones, and are getting ready for round 2 with what's left of the Eldar and Krork. They've diminished greatly, they've lost a lot, but it hasn't broken them yet, and even if every dead Necron is one less Necron, it'll take about 100 of the lesser modern races of the galaxy to make that happen. The Infinite Empire may not be in its prime, and it has a civil war every 5 minutes between bickering Necron lords, but by God are they going to make everyone acknowledge that valid claims or not, the rightful rulers of reality are back to slap this Imperium and Chaos nonsense back down. A good amount of pride can be felt by those 1% of Necrons able to feel such a thing any longer. Ugh. I come to the same problem I feel with the Orcs. By our standards, negative pride, dude. If the Dark Eldar are invading real space, 99% of the time they aren't partaking in a tabletop game battle or something like that. They're kidnapping civilians. Hardly behavior to act high and mighty over. They're numerically inferior, they've lost their psychic powers on purpose to hide, they're monstrous slavers reliant on others to survive. Their entire society is gang warfare and rulership by those same gangs, and they have no long-term plan beyond throwing other races in front of Slaanesh for as long as possible. By our own standards, or any reasonable ones, they're disgusting creatures that shouldn't rightfully have a shred of pride. But they don't operate on our standards. They operate on Drukhari asshole standards. Any Dark Eldar that has functioning morality systems has it beaten out of them at childhood, or killed out of them. They operate on the standards that they're above everyone else is rightfully theirs, be it as slaves or property, and yes, those are different when it comes to the Dark Eldar. Them needing to worry about Slaanesh is not a problem, because they make it a problem for everyone else. That's how they refill their souls, by basically throwing people in front of Slaanesh instead of themselves and skimming a bit off the top. And beyond anything else, they like what they do. They enjoy being horrible, awful beings that treat everything around them as literal furniture. They enjoy their real space raids. They enjoy inflicting untold suffering upon their lessers. And the problem for keeping them humble is that every circumstance in the galaxy has conspired to make things work out just fine for them on that front for so long, and even with recent shakeups, they still have grounds to keep doing what they have been. Kamaraz's damn near unassailable by anyone. It's in the webway, so getting to it is already a monumental task. Even if they do, the Dark Eldar almost never view it as an actual invasion. If anything, dinners just come to them. Why should they feel anything but pride? Are they not constantly proving they can wreak havoc on the races of the galaxy and get away with it? No one can touch them meaningfully as a faction like everyone else can be hurt. Hive fleets can be slain, planets obliterated, but Kamaraz's damn near eternal even on Eldar timescales. Even when demons breached into it and when the Great Rift formed, the Mandrakes just shut off the tap and no more demons. Problem solved. Vec died and came back. Why should the Dark Eldar and their viewing of reality be anything but proud of where they are? For something I will say that's actually impressive even outside of their moral standards, though, they reverse engineered their entire technological base without the psychic powers required to make it function. The best possible comparison would be if we had to, right now, recreate all of our tech in a way that doesn't require something like steel or oil and did it no problem. Genuinely impressive stuff that anyone would be bragging about. Because of all this, we get another 2-for-1 ranking. If you view them by our standards, disgusting sweat goblins who should be eternally ashamed of themselves for not only creating Slaanesh, but continuing to feed her. But in their viewing of the world, who gives a damn about any of that? They're as powerful as they need to be, they can go out into the galaxy on a whim and kidnap a planet or two, then leave, and peace out with a million slaves. Who cares that they live in a society that has a hard expiration date, even ignoring all the problems that can crop up over time on top of it? Acknowledging that would do two things the Dark Eldar won't, and in some cases can't do. That they have weaknesses, and that they'd have to stop having horrible fun. Emperor knows they aren't doing either of those things anytime soon, so in their own twisted version of reality, they deserve to be the most arrogant goobers around. I'd say a long and drawn-out death because they deserve that more, but honestly, there's a 50-50 shot some of them would somehow survive or just get off on it. Having saved the best for last, I will now begin glazing. There's no faction in the setting of Warhammer 40,000 that has earned the right to as much arrogance as the Eldar, Craftworld and Harlequin alike. Either created by the beings the Necrons themselves sold their souls to material gods to defeat, or uplifted by them, they've been on top of creation ever since their titanic beginnings. They fought said Necrons, and per the 8th edition Craftworld Codex, basically every time they engaged an enemy, they came out victorious. Their gods were sources of power and in some ways tools for them, in a symbiotic relationship kind of way, but it was the Eldar calling their gods forth to battle. They ruled for 65 million years. I was giving the Necron shit for the supposed rulers of the galaxy sleeping all that time. The Eldar were in charge all that time. The singular time they supposedly struggled was against the race that originally coined the term Monkai. Incidentally, yes, that originated from an actual species in universe, even if out of universe clearly this is just them calling humans monkeys like Frieza does Saiyans. Throughout that time there was a single hurdle, which they clearly conquered because otherwise there'd be no Slaanesh because the Eldar would be dead. For eons, since the time dinosaurs ruled the Earth to when mankind renamed Earth Terra, the Eldar held dominion over almost the entirety of the Milky Way galaxy. And if they didn't own something, it was because they didn't feel like owning it. Surfing the stars, creating wonders on a whim, reincarnating for no other reason than they're simply a bit bored of their current life. The old ones have the generic title of the greatest psychic beings ever, and other similar such ones, but the Eldars were the rulers of reality in the most stunning of ways. And then Slaanesh. This is the part where everyone says they deserve Slaanesh and created her. For the most of the Empire, yeah, I guess. Reap what you sow and all that. But the Craftworlds and the Harlequins? No. They didn't create Slaanesh. Every time someone says that, they're objectively wrong. These groups of Eldar are the ones who fled when they saw it was coming, who tried to warn others to stop them, and then saved whatever aspects of Eldar culture they could alongside the people willing to join them when they saw the writing on the wall. They went from cargo haulers to the last vestiges of what once ruled the galaxy. And god damn it, the pride they still feel is earned. Every time they look down on someone, it is earned. What ultimately amounts to a bunch of camping RVs with a hoarding problem have managed to survive the instant death of 99% of their race, a galaxy full of hostile life, and the rise of a new superpower determined to see them dead for not being humans. Their powers are weaker, their connection to the warp a sentence of eternal damnation, and they nut up every day and still say no, I will not be dying. Or if not that dying is just another step to kicking your ass in a Wraithguard suit. The Craftworlds are the vestiges of unrivaled greatness and continue being a threat to everyone that pisses them off. Bael'Tan's the only Craftworld that consistently win, and their scoreboard is things like taking on 10 chapters and entire sector fleets at once, or simultaneously destroying Chaos Cults on 3 different worlds before they even knew what was happening. Ulthwé guarded the Eye of Terror and was pissing on every Black Crusade before it reached Cadia. Saimhan erases entire armies on their jet bikes before their opponents can blink. With the barest remaining dredges of the power they once held, they're still a major faction. The future isn't just theirs for the taking, they can see it crystal clear with their Farseers, and woe betide anyone between them and it. The Harlequins of course deserve special mention for the Custodes murder spree, and for being basically the only faction in all of 40k with a solid plan. They may not know the entire thing, but Kegarak does, and they enact it as he demands without stumbling or complaint. And yes, I am ignoring the Tyranids and Orcs when it comes to having a plan, because eat everything ever or fight everything ever respectively aren't exactly brilliant showcases of forethought and genius. The Craftworlders and the Harlequins earn every bit of arrogance and snobbery they throw at you, and I am biased, and if you didn't see this coming, I don't know what to tell you. Their starting point as an army is basically Dark Souls 3, where everything is ruined, reality is on the way out, trying to save it is probably meaningless, and death is right around every corner. And from these circumstances, they kill damn near everything in their way. Eldar win rates on the tabletop are always up, I will never stop glazing them, glory to the Craftworlds, and may the Harlequins put a joy buzzer pipe bomb in your wallet. Also, the Exodites and the Inari exist too. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the ego to my Eldar. Definitely something I deserve to have and showboat around the place with. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Eldar. That's it, thanks for hanging around for the end of the video. Not really inspired for a joke here right now, so I'm just kinda yapping. Stretch the video time a few more seconds, you know? It's probably helpful somehow. You ever notice how the Joy Toy releases for Warhammer tend to let us know what actual models are gonna be released next? If you did notice that, then you noticed wrong, and I'm lying to you. They're entirely unrelated. Idiot. I got you, you goddamn clown.